So, ladies and gentlemen, Aklon here, and of course, welcome back to each and every one of you to another episode of The Shill Show. Now, I want to start off by saying internet is always a problem here in South Africa because apparently my service provider thinks that it is normal for the internet to basically drop every few seconds and for the streams to be basically undoable. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to collect all of the evidence, including video evidence, to show them that this is not normal. Whatever the hell is wrong with my internet cannot be normal. But it's taking much longer than I would have liked and than I would have hoped. So if you are experiencing internet drops or buffering or whatever, just know that it is probably not you, it is probably on my side, and there's very little that I can do about that. It's just life at the minute. Anyways, I don't know what episode this is of The Shill Show. I think it's episode 4 or episode 5 or one of those. But of course, we had 10.1. 10.1 has launched, ladies and gentlemen, and I, for one, am very excited about that. There's a lot that we have to discuss in today's Shill Show. Remember, you can find this show everywhere where you get your podcasts, except for Amazon Podcast, which will not let me upload podcasts because I'm not American or in any of the countries where they allow it. So if you want to get the show as a podcast, you can do so over on Patreon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and public radio, and all the rest of it. There's like a bunch of places where I upload to, or just right here on YouTube. You know, whichever one you find more exciting. We're going to be talking about everything 10.1 today. We're going to be talking about the story, the world, the introduction, and then, of course, there's a lot of lore speculation. Even though I think the big things, like the really big things about the lore, is actually going to come next week or maybe the week after that when we finish the raid. I think there's some serious stories that's being hidden from us at the minute that we already know that there's been some encrypted stuff that we have not been able to see yet. Probably quite a few more encrypted cinematics that we haven't seen yet. Even though, you know, I'm going to be talking about the cinematic usage in 10.1 because I think the cinematics have been utilized a lot more this expansion than ever before. You know, almost every quest line will have multiple in-game cinematics that play throughout the quest line, and it's fun. It is amazing, even though, you know, in the past, Blizzard would sort of use cinematics as a big moment, right? It would be like a giant fight or like a very important death. Something to that effect would be in a cinematic. Everything else would just sort of be in-game, you know? It would just be like, you know, you just see it happen in front of you with the weird in-game animations where the character is dying and all you hear is, oh, argh, and then the character just falls over and you're like, oh, they're dead now, right? Now, with everything, almost, even if it's just like a conversation, there's a cinematic that takes place, an in-game cinematic, and it just really makes it feel so much more involved. It really helps sell you being there, especially seeing your own character in those cinematics. It's just, I think it's phenomenally well done. The story overall, I think, is just super, super well done. Okay, so I have an entire list here of things that I want to talk about today because normally I will just wing it because I have a general idea of what I want to talk about. But in this one, there's so much that I want to talk about that I actually have a list. Like, I actually prepared for this, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so let's start with the 10.1 campaign. And I want to talk first about the things that work and then the things that didn't work. So we're going to be talking about first normal gameplay stuff, and then we're going to do massive speculation stuff about some of the things that's come out. And to anyone that's asking if you've missed anything, we literally just started. So we're getting into it right now. So the first thing that I want to note on that I think 10.1 is, I want to say, like, originally when I had this thought, I thought to myself, this is like revolutionary. But then I realized it's not actually revolutionary because it really is just a continuation of what Dragonflight has been doing correctly since its launch. and that is the flow of the storylines. The storylines feel so much better than what they have ever felt before. They are much more condensed. I don't know if you guys remember, about 2 weeks ago, we had this discussion, and really in Dragonflight 10.1, it's just so clear. Blizzard no longer needs to create story for 6 months, and it stands out in the story. You know, back in the day, Blizzard would have a 6-month patch cycle, and I know people would go, no, it's not 6 months, it was every 3 months. No, it wasn't. It was every 6 months, because every 0.5 patch added 0 new content to the game. It was just like a glorified patch number where they just balanced the game a little bit more. Whereas, you know, so Blizzard would have to introduce story that would be enough to sort of hold the player over for 6 months. And unless you're going to present the players with a very watered down, sort of useless story, there is no game in the world that can create a story that can keep players busy for 6 months. It's just not possible. Especially if you consider that those players play at least 3 times a week. It's just not going to be done. No game in the world is ever going to be able to do that. So how would Blizzard usually manage this? Well, with artificial time, time stops, right? So you'd have these giant artificial droughts built into the game where you can't continue. You have to come back next week. And oftentimes it would feel very arbitrary. Like, you know, the time between this quest and the other quest doesn't make sense from a canonical story perspective. It's just there because they wouldn't have enough story if they gave you everything right now. In Dragonflight, and again in 10.1, none of that is present. We have, and the word escapes me now, we actually in World of Warcraft do have a word for this, but the word is completely escaping me right now. But we do have a mandatory stop in the game. If you finish the quest line up until the point where Sibelian and Abyssian have both gotten hurt really badly, the story ends, right? And now you have to wait for the raid release, you have to wait for the raid to be finished. Time gating, thank you. Fuck, I couldn't remember what it was. I kept going time skip, and I'm like, no, it's not a time skip. It's not a time skip. Time skip is something very different. It's time something, but I can't remember time what. So yes, time gate. We have a time gate now. There's a difference though with the time gate that we have in 10.1. It makes sense, as with almost all of the other time gates that we've had in Dragonflight so far. With the, remember, I said this, in Dragonflight, the original 10.0 Dragonflight, right? The time gates really felt natural. Why? They don't know you. None of these races know you. So, of course, they're not going to let you in on their deepest, darkest secrets without knowing you. So, really, the renown system, in my sort of RP world-building brain, the renown system really was the reputation system from the old days, but done right. I had to get comfortable with these people. They had to get comfortable with me. They had to get to know me. They had to know that I wasn't working for the enemy. And then once they sort of figured that out, I got more and more of their story, and their stories became more and more personal as time went on. You know, so it wasn't just, it didn't feel arbitrary. In 10.1, the most recent time gate that we're getting makes so much sense. It actually seeks to enhance why you're having that time gate in the first place. Sibelian and Abyssian have just gotten seriously wounded. Not just physically, also a little bit ego. You know, Sibelian thought that he could take Farak. And Farak, not only could he not beat Farak played with him. Like, Farak made a fool of him. So now we're getting this sort of mandatory time gate where the story will not continue until the raid is finished. But to me, it actually feels more like both Abyssian and Sibelian need time to heal. They need time to sort of recover, but also recover some of that ego, you know, not to feel so defeated. We need time to get more people, because clearly just the 3 of us were not enough. So we're gonna need an army to take on Farak and to take on Aberres. And this makes sense. It would take time to get an army together. Now, do I think that it's perfect? Do I think that Blizzard doesn't need to do anything else? This is just fine. No, of course not, right? There's always more that can be done. For example, I would have preferred if all time gates came with some kind of what I would call intermediary quest lines, even if it is just small quest lines, even if it is just champion. We've heard rumors of movement on the western flank. Go check it out. And it's literally just you flying to the western flank, standing, around a corner somewhere and looking, and you get this small in-game cinematic that shows shadows walking into a hidden entrance or whatever the case might be, right? Just that, it's small, but it will help sell the time skip or the time gate a lot better, because you're still working. You can see that they're still working on plans. It's just not, right now the way Blizzard is doing it is sort of through the world quest system, where whenever you do a world quest, every once in a while there'll be voice lines of some of the main characters telling you, champion, we need to thin the herd or whatever. The problem with those, and why I think Blizzard should probably stop using those, after the third or fourth time, it starts feeling a little like, dude, how many times do I have to thin the herd? Like, I recognize that there's always going to be some grind work, right? I recognize that, but I don't need to hear from Sibelian for 400 times that I need to thin the herd. I'm doing this, but I'm actually doing it for the gear, not for thinning the herd, because I realize the herd is never actually going to get thinned at this rate, right? So I do think that Blizzard could be looking at some intermediary quest lines just to make the time gates feel a little bit more organic, but I think 10.1 has done that spectacularly. The last thing that didn't work before we get to the absolute praise that I have for 10.1 was the Niffen introduction. Don't get me wrong, I love the Niffen. I think the Niffen as a race work really well. I love the fact that they provide this bit of comedic sort of relief within an otherwise very, very serious patch. The Niffen is actually quite a nice addition. The introduction, though, didn't feel too organic to me. Here you have a race that has, by all accounts, never seen mortals in their lives before. They've been cut off from the rest of the world. Suddenly, mortals, and not only mortals, dragons show up. Now, remember, the Niffen should have been around during the time of Deathwing. So they would have had stories about black dragons and the things that, black dragons do. So you would have expected them, when they saw Rathian and Sibelian and Abyssian, to be a little bit more, ooh, no, what the fuck are you guys doing in our home, right? But they weren't. They were almost from the beginning very sort of, accepted us in and didn't really give a shit. They were just happy for us to be there. I would have liked to see a little bit more, maybe like one chapter. The first chapter is us trying to get in their good graces, to try and convince them that, hey, we're not bad guys. We're not actually allied with these evil guys up top. We are your friends. I would have preferred that. Instead, Blizzard decided to go with the, clearly you're the enemy of my enemy, so you must be my friend approach. Which is fine. I think it could have been done better, but it is a small gripe overall. And that really is the whole list of what I think could have worked better in 10.1. Now to get to the things that I think work really well in 10.1. The first, as we've discussed already, the flow of the story, I felt was better handled than ever before. The story makes sense, but it is smaller. It's a lot more congested. It's a lot more focused, and I think the reason for that is Blizzard, for the first time ever, know that they don't have to create a story for 6 months. The story is only going to need to keep players busy for 2.5, maybe 3 months. Then the next patch comes out with more story. It allows Blizzard to tell a much more targeted story, but it's a lot less fragmented. In the past, what you would get is, this giant storyline involving the Black Dragons, and it's really giant because it's basically time-gated to hell. But then you'd also get another story about the Blue Dragons, and a story about the Red Dragons, and a story about the Green Dragons, and it's all time-gated. All in all, when you really look at the amount of story that you got for each of those Dragonflights, it's insignificant. It's not really that massive. But it's big because there's like a lot of them and there's a lot of time gates in between them. this time around, it's targeted, right? This story is about the Black Dragonflight. And I remember actually feeling a sense of pride, even though I'm not a Black Dragon. The final cinematic, where you're standing on top of, what's that place called? The giant spire oh my god, why am I just, I'm just blanking on everything now. In the main city, Valdrakken, the tower in Valdrakken, right? When you're standing on top there, and Alexstrasza, after finding out about Shadowflame, she says, we'll handle this. You Black Dragons cannot go back to Zaralak Cavern. Let the rest of the flight handle this. Why is Alexstrasza saying that? Well, because they know what happens to Black Dragons when they come anywhere near Shadowflame. So Alexstrasza is immediately going, no thanks, we don't want another Neltharion. We'll just deal with this. And then you have Abyssian sort of standing up going, no, this is our fight. If the Black Dragonflight is going to have the respect that they deserve, we need to show that we can take care of our shit. Right? So this is our fight. And with all due respect, we'll fight it. So just let us go. That was such a cool moment. That was such a cool moment in the story to see Abyssian just sort of, because usually Abyssian is this like really nice guy that just wants to, you know, really help everyone. But to see Abyssian stand up for his flight, stand up for his brothers, and be like, look, we can handle this. Leave us alone. Let us take this fight. I thought was really cool. I also thought Blizzard did a really good job with the character progression of Sibelian in this one. You know, Sibelian actually, towards the end, he's willing to sacrifice his own life to save Abyssian. And there's this really cool moment where he basically mirrors what Abyssian did for him with the Shadow Flame, where he says, brother, I will do anything to save you. I will do anything to save you. And to me, that was just, I'm not gonna lie, it was a little bit emotional, right? It was, because he's this hard ass that doesn't really give a shit about anything, just wants to prove that he can be the next aspect. And instead here, he's willing to actually sacrifice himself for his brother, which was really, really cool, I think, at least for me. And just want to say, Sapphire Raven with the 10 community subs, really appreciate that. Hearts in chat, ladies and gentlemen. Hearts in chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I thought that was, like, it was really cool to see these stories. And I think with the next storyline, we might see Rathian come to the same sort of, or go through the same motions as well. I do think, though, if you are a massive Rathian simp or a Sibelian simp, so far, Abyssian has proven to me that he is the only one that can truly be the aspect. I'm sorry, I know that this is destroying a lot of people's sort of hopes and dreams, but both Rathian and Sibelian, while yes, they're experiencing massive character growth at the moment, and obviously that's really cool to see, Rathian is very young, right? Very, very young. So that right there sort of, in my mind, disqualifies him from ever even trying to be the aspect. But more importantly, Abyssian or Sibelian, Sibelian has never learned how to play with other people. Right? Like, he's never learned how to play with these other... He was sent to Outland by Neltharion, and he has basically ruled over the Black Dragons in Outland as their de facto leader. There was never him having to work with anyone else. Whereas Abyssian seems to be the only one that understands, these are my brothers. Without them, I'm nothing. The Black Dragonflight has to come first, and I have to be able to save all of them. So right now, he makes the most sense. I'm not saying that he will be the aspect, but he makes the most sense for me to be the aspect. And we're going to be talking, probably next week, we'll do a giant conversation about what is the aspect, how does aspecthood work, how does the Dragonflights work, because I've been collecting a lot of information on the flights and how it works, how it operates, how all of it came together, how the order magic within these flights operate and what it's done, and also why Deathwing may have fallen. But we're going to touch on some of those in this episode, but next week we'll probably handle the more deep dive into that. Most importantly, I never felt like I was wasting my time in 10.1. Not once did I feel like the game or the quests were trying to waste my time. It seems like Blizzard have finally, with Dragonflight, they have sort of thrown away the old guard of kill 10 of this and collect 5 of this, and then not all things drop the thing that you need to collect. So you end up spending 20 minutes trying to kill things just to collect all of the things that you need. For most things that you have to collect within the game, it's very short, very sweet, very simple. It's gameplay first, but the gameplay tends to be a lot more kill big guy, collect 4 little things, which I think is much better. It just feels much better. It doesn't feel like I'm just running around doing useless killing for no reason whatsoever. The design of Zaralak Kevin, and we're not going to be spending too much time on this because ultimately I want to get to the cool speculation stuff. The design of Zaralak Kevin, I thought, is... I'm not going to say that it's my favorite zone ever introduced in the game because it's no Nazjatar. Yes, that is still probably the best designed zone Blizzard have ever made. My favorite zone would always be Nagrand, old school Nagrand, not the new one, but old school Nagrand would be my favorite. But Nazjatar is definitely the best designed zone that Blizzard have ever made. The playing with different levels, the up-down vertical storytelling of the zone, it was just a phenomenal zone all around, and it also looked really cool. Dragonflight zones are really up there. I love the spaciousness of them, but you can see they were less designed with that kind of verticality in mind and more designed with just open spaces that allow you to really dragon ride, which is cool. It does its job, and it really does solve the whole this was made for dragons. Zaralak Cavern provides me with a much more... it's perfect, right? It's open enough that you don't feel restricted, but there are times where you're a little restricted enough that you still know, okay, this is a cave, which I think is really cool. It also does a really good job of selling the storyline. What I mean by that is, when you go throughout Zaralak Cavern, you have 4 different biomes. As the story unfolds, the story explains why each biome looks the way that it looks, which I think is really cool. Everything seems to be untouched by humanity, or by the civilized world up top. You really do feel like you're in this very ancient place, this place that has not seen civilization for a really long time. I still want to know how exactly the Jordan survived down there for so long. Like, what were they doing for 10,000 years inside Zaralak Cavern? Like, I don't know if we're ever going to get that, but I would like to, right? To know that. And I also want to know what the relationship between the Niffin and the Jordan have been. So far, there's been sort of small references from the Niffin about the Jordan, but all things considered seems to point that they never really mixed, which I find hard to believe, because Zaralak Cavern is large, but it's not that large. They must have had run-ins with each other, and the Jordan being the war-minded folk that they are, I can't see them just not, like, attacking, right? So there is... I'm wondering about that. I really hope that we're going to get some kind of story about that. But okay. So let's start with the story, because this is where things actually get a little... let's call it strange. I think I'll go with the word strange, even though I would probably be more profane if YouTube allowed. The Whispers. All of the Black Dragons, as soon as they enter into Zaralak Cavern, start hearing whispers. Here's the funny thing, though. They don't differentiate or specify that the whispers they're hearing is from the old gods or from Neltharion, because they constantly make it seem like they're hearing Neltharion's whispers. Like, he's the one whispering to them. There's like a voice that they can hear constantly, and you can see that voice as they move closer and closer to Aberrus. They keep mentioning that the voice is getting louder and louder and louder. So the whispers are increasing in intensity, which I think is really interesting. It's not just the Shadow Flame, and when they're touched by the Shadow Flame, it's them. But here's what makes it truly ominous. We hear nothing. And neither does Emberthal. Why? We don't hear anything. Remember, we've been touched by the old gods before. We've heard the whispers of the old gods before. We know that we can hear the whispers of the old gods. We also know that we are the result of the curse of flesh, which means that every mortal carries at least some semblance of the old gods within them, some essence of the old gods within them. And yet we hear nothing. Emberthal hears nothing. It's only the Black Dragons. Now, this leads me to believe that, to some extent, Blizzard was trying to show the incredible weakness the Black Dragons have to the madness of the old gods. Just again, going to show that connection that they have to the earth really serves as just a conduit. It increases the power of the old gods by so much. Whereas we, mortals, that should, for all intents and purposes, be prime property to the old gods, we're not as powerful. The whispers are not strong enough for us to hear. So the corruption is not so strong that it can influence us, but it absolutely has an effect on the Black Dragonflight. That is a really, really cool thing, as far as I'm concerned. But then it immediately throws up another question. As you continue with the storyline, you find Farak, and this was actually done really cool. Eventually, there's just, in this caldera, there's this giant mound of lava, right? And Abyssian and Sibelian keep hinting that whatever is in the center of this caldera might be the answer to everything that the Jarradin are doing here. And then if you look at the lava, and this I saw only out of my peripheral vision, because I was busy looking at the screen, listening to Sibelian and Abyssian speak, and I saw something moving, like literally just on the side of my screen. I saw this thing moving, and I looked, and you could see a part of Farak's wing just sort of barely sticking out of the lava. Like, Farak is completely covered, but there's just this small part of his wing, like the bone, that's sticking out of the lava, which I thought was like a really, maybe it's just an accident, but if it's not an accident, then it's a really cool little attention to detail, kind of just precursing to what is about to happen there. So that was really cool. But interestingly enough, Farak isn't as affected by the Shadow Flame as Sibelian is. When Farak shoots Sibelian with the Shadow Flame, Sibelian is wounded. His arm specifically is wounded, but it's not life-threatening. However, the Shadow Flame is coursing through his veins and literally inching its way towards its soul, trying to corrupt him, and he can't stop it. Like, he genuinely can't block it. Farak, on the other hand, is bathing in this shit. Like, he's just lying there and all of it's just running on top of his head. You know, like a nice shower. He's taking a shower in this shit. And right at the end, we get some semblance that there are whispers. Farak is hearing the Shadow Flame whisper to him. Funnily enough, though, Farak knows that it's the Shadow Flame that's whispering to him. He's not going mad. He's not going crazy. The Shadow Flame isn't convincing him that it's his thoughts, which seems to be how the old gods do their thing. He knows it's the Shadow Flame that's whispering to him. And all he's doing there is trying to collect all of its power so that he can use it. Now, Abyssian and Sibelian do note that they wonder if Iridikron sacrificed Farak for this power, because they believe Farak is going to be driven mad by the Shadow Flame. They believe the Shadow Flame is going to drive him mad. I think no. And I think it has something to do with the process that the Titans put the aspects through when they were created. Like, the way in which the Dragonflights were created, I think is what's creating this. Now, we have done many videos on this, so I'm just going to very briefly run over how I think it all came together. If you want a more detailed version of it, just go check out my videos on how the dragon aspects and the flights and so came together, because I've done many of those. One of the reasons I think Neltharion ultimately started to rebel against the Titans was for what was lost. If we look at the annotated books that we find about Neltharion, we see that Neltharion blames the Titans for lying about the old gods. And not only for lying about the old gods, but lying about the Black Empire, lying about the early days of the world and how the world came to be. Neltharion believes, and Neltharion says this to Thrall in the Dawn of the Aspect novel, he says to Thrall, they will pay for what they did, for what was done to us and also to Azeroth. So clearly, as far as Neltharion is concerned, the Titans did something to them and it wasn't something good. And I think it has to do with the order that was introduced. The order that was introduced, in my opinion, removed the freedom that Protodrakes ultimately enjoyed. Now, the current lore as it stands about what the Protodrakes and or the Primal Incarnates, what happened to them. According to the lore as it stands right now, the Primal Incarnates rejected the gifts of the Titans. That's an important word. Rejected. So in other words, it was offered to them. They were offered the gifts of the Titans. The Titans probably wanted to give their gifts to all Protodrakes, or perhaps to all intelligent Protodrakes. The Primal Incarnates rejected the gifts and instead turned towards the elements for their power. So the Primal Incarnates weren't always part of the elemental planes. Well, they were. We know Protodrakes came from the elemental planes, but they weren't always allied with the elements. It was after rejecting the gifts of the Titans that they then sought out the power of the elements. And, as you can imagine, this made them incredibly powerful. The Shadow Flame that Farak is now absorbing suggests that even though Farak made probably some kind of deal with Ragnaros, and FYI, just throwing it out there, we have actual in-game evidence or lore. And for those of you that want to see what that lore is, go do the campaign for the allied race of the, I believe it's the Dark Iron Dwarves. If you do that campaign, I think it's that one. I could be wrong. Someone messaged me about this. They speak about Ragnaros returning. So for those of you that think Ragnaros is dead, maybe not. Maybe not. But anyway, so when Farak made that deal with Ragnaros, it at no point removed Ragnaros' ability or Farak's ability to still absorb powers from elsewhere. It simply gave him greater power over fire. But the fact that he can absorb the Shadow Flame fairly easily without it killing him suggests that this is an innate power that they appear to hold. So I started thinking, why then did the aspects lose this ability to just accept, power, elemental power within them, since dragons are of the elemental plane? But more importantly, why this incredible weakness to Shadow, to the Void? Why does the Void appear to have this incredible power over the Black Dragonflight? And I would argue most likely over all of the Dragonflights. The only reason the other Dragonflights have never had to deal with the void is because they're not connected to the earth. The connection between the Black Dragonflight and Azeroth is what really magnified the Whispers of the Void. But I think any dragon, any of the dragons that come into contact with shadow magic would probably ultimately fall to it. And I wondered why. Like, what could possibly be the catalyst for this? And I think I have a reason, but it's not necessarily well thought out. So if it's mistaken, if I'm wrong, then I apologize. So when you ask most people, where is corruption most likely to take hold? People will tell you in chaos, right? With chaotic movements, with countries that's a mess. This is where corruption takes place very rapidly. That's not entirely true. Corruption tends to flourish in more ordered societies. Like the kind of corruption, me and my brother were actually speaking about this, and it's a little bit real life, but it is apt. South Africa is probably one of the most corrupt countries on Earth. Not the most corrupt, but one of the most corrupt. You know, my government steals billions of dollars every single year from the economy through all sorts of schemes. But it's very unsophisticated corruption. It's the kind of corruption where every single person in the country goes, you just took that. You just stole that. Because they don't give a shit. They're just stealing it. It's chaos. So the corruption is there, but it's unsophisticated. But then you go to, like, highly ordered societies. You go to America, you go to Europe, and the corruption is there, but it's a lot more sophisticated. It's a lot harder to see, but it's usually a lot more widespread. It's everywhere. It's just very difficult to pin down. It's very difficult to figure out exactly where the corruption starts and where it ends. This is a little bit of a, like, real life conversation here, so I guess put your fingers in your ears if you don't want to hear it. But the Germans in the 1930s, they were not barbarians. In fact, far from it. They were one of the most sophisticated civilizations on the European continent. They were highly ordered, highly structured, highly civilized. And yet they fell to the whispers of a madman. And they became, for a while, the most hated country on Earth. Why was that possible? Well, as psychologists have figured out, the more civilized and the more educated a society becomes, the easier it is for things of that nature to take hold and take root. It's a lot easier to get that corruption to flow within such a society than what it is in a society that is a little bit more uncivilized. Now, using the real life, and I don't want to talk about the real life too much, but using that concept, because that's how I started thinking about this. The Protodrakes really is the uncivilized savage, right? There's no order within the Protodrakes. They were born within the elemental planes. They are chaotic. So it makes it very difficult for corruption of a void or an order nature to take place within them, mainly because of how they were structured. They have this ability to accept power into them without that power necessarily corrupting them. And this entire theory, by the way, falls apart if we find out in about 2 or 3 months from now, Farak has become an absolute fucking lunatic, right? And he's basically summoning N'Zoth again, right? If that does happen, all of this falls apart and it doesn't really matter, right? It's end of the conversation at that point. But yeah, this stream is gonna lag, guys. As I said in the beginning, this is the internet. There's literally nothing I can do about it. Just hold on. Hopefully it fixes itself. If you want, I can wait a little. Let's just see if it sort of finds itself. The order that was introduced within the aspects, from what I can tell, appears to be the very thing that makes them so incredibly susceptible to corruption from all aspects. And this kind of started me down a very weird path, because I reached this sort of realization by looking at the things that Deathwing had done, kind of in a bit of a reverse method. So, Neltharion has always been very into the whole experimentation thing, right? He's consistently experimenting with different elements of aspectral power. We've now seen him twice try to use the essence of the aspects in order to create beings, with both the Drakthir as well as with the chromatic dragons. Both of those had very different results by the end of it. And I started asking myself, but why? Why exactly would Neltharion do this? Well, let's start putting things together. Neltharion believes that the Titans had taken something from them. Something that without it, it's made them far more easy to control. And he also believes that the Titans took something from Azeroth, but he never actually tells us what he believes the Titans took from Azeroth or did to Azeroth, but he does believe that the Titans did do something. I believe now, more strongly than ever, that the Drakthir... So what do we know about the Drakthir? We know that the Drakthir exists because of the essence of each of the Dragonflights pumped into them. But then we also know that something within the Drakthir, something within the creation of the Drakthir, scared Neltharion so much that when the artifact broke, he instead decided to place all of the Drakthir in stasis because of whatever it is that they are. Because that genuinely, that comes out in 10.07, during the whole questline of 10.07, if you haven't done that yet, you learn about the Drakthir being in stasis and Deathwing making it very clear that they cannot be trusted. Without the artifact to control them, he's not going to take any chance of trusting them. He's one of the black dragons that's now basically in stasis herself. I can't remember her name now. Her name escapes me. But you find her in 10.07. She actually writes to Neltharion and says, hey, yes, the artifact was broken, but I actually found that if you speak to them, they could choose to follow you. So this immediately made me think, because Neltharion actually gets angry at her and he tells her, stop what you're doing, put them in stasis and be done with this. Finish your experiments. Stop talking to them. Stop trying to fix this. They will remain in stasis. Just remove, according to Deathwing, the Black Dragon essence. That's all I want from you. Remove the Black Dragon essence from them. Right? Adamantia. Thank you, Kimmy. That's exactly the dragon. So it has to do with free will. That has to be the thing that scares Deathwing. They have free will. Now, where do we know free will to come from within the concept of World of Warcraft? Within the world of World of Warcraft, where does free will originate from? In my estimation, the Curse of Flesh. Because it's after the introduction of the Curse of Flesh that the dwarves run and will not follow the Titans anymore. Where every being that has been touched by the Curse of Flesh starts to decide their own future instead of going along with what the Titans had previously wanted from them. So if this Curse of Flesh is the thing that created free will, then I'm almost certain that it is Shadow that created the Drakthir. Deathwing took the essence of each of the Drakthir, of each of the Dragonflights. He placed it inside a mortal being. We know it had to be some kind of elf, or some kind of early elfish, maybe like an ancestor to the elves, because their visage form sort of, I think, betrays what they ultimately, what the mortal element of their creation was, and that mortal element of their creation would have almost certainly had some essence of Shadow in it. Right? Because remember, those mortals came to be as a result of the Curse of Flesh. We don't know all of the stories about how mortals came to be, just to be clear. We don't know exactly how the trolls came to be. We don't know. The trolls were just there, according to the lore. And then the trolls, thanks to their position to the to the Well of Eternity, eventually evolved to become elves, right? That's the story that the Titans told us. But we now know that that story is complete bullshit. We know that now. That story, or not, we don't know that it's complete bullshit. We know that it could be complete bullshit. Because the Titans clearly hid a lot of things from us. If you go through their own words in Dragonflight, it shows very clearly that they were telling us stories simply because that's what they wanted us to believe, not what we should actually have been told. So I do believe that we'll eventually find out that the trolls weren't actually just naturally there. The trolls were probably also some kind of curse of flesh being that was created, or maybe a being that was created during the days of the Black Empire. So going back really far into the history of World of Warcraft, so much older than what we originally thought they were. And I think the story of the elves may be oversold as well. Because when you think about the Titans wanting to cover things up, wouldn't it... I mean, that's a good cover-up, right? If you don't want the mortal beings to know that the old gods have the ability to create life and have the ability to influence evolution because it's not ordered and therefore it's a lie, well, then it's an easy sell to just go, you know what? The elves came to be because of the trolls that settled things to the Well of Eternity, and then they evolved and they became elves. Congratulations, there's your story. Now fuck off. It sounds a little convenient. I think the old gods were involved in that. And I think that's why Neltharion was so afraid. But then that also seeks to explain why Neltharion created Shadowflame. I'm still on this whole... So, Sibelian believes that it was the Shadowflame that drove his father crazy. He says it multiple times. This is what drove my father mad, right? He believes it was the Shadowflame. And I'm sort of willing to believe him, even though it is a slight retcon of what we know about Neltharion. It's a retcon insofar as you could also just see it as the more explanation for what was ultimately just old god whispers, right? So they're just giving a little bit more explanation there. But now I keep coming back to the same problem that I have had for the longest time. Why? Why Shadowflame? What is it about Shadowflame that, like, what is it about this thing that would have made Deathwing seek it out in the first place? Why would he have played with this? Why not just Shadow? If he really wanted power, why not just Shadow? Because ultimately we know a dragon infused with Shadow would be incredibly powerful. So if it was only power, then Shadow would have been good enough. And he would have had ample access to Shadow because he was already being corrupted by the old gods in the first place. So the old gods would have gladly gifted him that Shadow. But then you think about the possibility that there is Shadow within the Drakthir, and suddenly, and we know that Deathwing spent a lot of time in Aberrus trying to figure out what to do with the Drakthir now that the artifact had broken down, right? Now that he no longer had the artifact, he was trying to figure out how does he, quote unquote, fix the Drakthir. And I believe that's where Shadowflame comes in. When you go back in time during the Nostormu questlines, the Bronze Dragonflight questlines in Dragonflight, when you go back to the primordial Black Empire, you see all of the old gods sort of fighting, their forces fighting, and then you see the elements, the elemental lords. Do you guys remember which one of the elemental lords was completely neutral? It was Ragnaros. He was the only elemental lord that was neutral. Which now, at the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought, wow, who cares, you know? So he's neutral. So what, right? Maybe it's just an oversight. But now I'm starting to think, what if it wasn't an oversight? What if Ragnaros was the only elemental lord that didn't fight because he was corrupted, but fought simply because he wanted to. And that's why he was neutral to us. He wasn't serving the old gods. Yeah, he was fighting on behalf of an old god, but that's just because he liked fighting. It was fun, right? It was fun to take the boot to his brothers and sisters, and that's it, right? He just enjoyed the fight. So this makes you think, but could it be that the elements are completely, or at least the fire elements, are completely immune to Old God Whispers? And if that is the case, then Shadowflame starts to make a hell of a lot more sense. Neltharion wasn't, at the beginning at least, trying to empower himself. He was trying to fix the Drakthir. He was trying to figure out, and this, by the way, I believe is also why Sarkareth keeps believing that the Shadowflame is their legacy, because in a way it was, and it is. Before Deathwing used the Shadowflame to empower himself, he was trying to make it so that it would cleanse the corruption of the Drakthir. He probably first tried with just normal fire elements, or the element of fire, but this probably killed the Drakthir. We know that he had Drakthir constantly sent to Aberrus from their stasis pods, and none of them survived that came to Aberrus. So he most likely started with flame. This killed them, just straight up. They couldn't survive. And so he realized, okay, wait a second. The shadow within them, the flame kills the shadow, which kills them. So if I merged the shadow and the flame, perhaps that could sort of stabilize them, but it could also cleanse the corruption. Now, of course, as we would realize later on, and he probably also, the corruption of the void is so strong that it not even fire can cleanse it. Its corruption is permanent. Even after all of this time, even with what we believe to be all of the old gods dead, the corruption of the Shadow Flame is still there. It's still as powerful as it has ever been. Even without access to the lifebloods of the old gods, if indeed we believe that we had killed them, which I don't, but let's table that conversation for another day, right? To me, that makes the most sense. On the other side, right, we see another one of Deathwing's experiments that seek to showcase, I think, in his madness, trying to redeem himself, or trying to find a way to maybe save himself. And this comes from the chromatic dragons. You see, because the chromatic dragons are to order what the Drakthir are to shadow. Because with the chromatic dragons, what Deathwing had attempted was to use the essence from each of the flights and infuse it into a dragon, into order. And here we see it does not function. Order does not allow maybe the necessary framework to encompass so many variations. And so most chromatic dragons were born still, if born at all. Those that were born was basically just thrown out entirely. Let's just try and get back to it while we can. I can't really... Okay, so with the chromatic dragons, Deathwing tried to do the same thing he did with the Drakthir, only this time with Order, and it seems like Order just would not allow for that. Order would not allow for more power to be funneled in. And that might actually give us some insight into, again, Neltharion's mind and why he eventually turned his back on the Titans and the gifts, so to speak, of the Titans, and why he ultimately accepted Shadowflame into himself as well. He was trying to overcome the order that had been forced upon them. There's a lot of arguments that one can make back and forth. Neltharion, for example, when the time came for them to accept the gifts of the Titans, he was almost sort of absent-mindedly agreeing to it. If you read Dawn of the Aspects, you know, right at the end where the Titan Keepers are standing there telling them that they want to gift them with the gifts of the Titans to make them the protectors of Azeroth, All of the dragons say yes. Neltharion is sort of stood just staring off into the distance to the mountains. And it isn't until Maligo sort of growls at him that he goes, it's fine. Who gives a shit, So one might make the argument that he just did not care as much. Or maybe he didn't even know what he was agreeing to at the time. That's also possible, although he was very intelligent, so that probably not. I think more, it was just a way of trying to regain control of himself. I think that's really what it boils down to. I think that's ultimately what it played to. Now, again, we'll probably dive into this much deeper when I've done more research on this specific topic, because, yeah. The last thing I want to talk about is Farak's, and we've already sort of spoken about this, but I want to talk about Farak's resistance to the Shadow Flame, but then also just the Primal Incarnates in general. There seems to be a lot more going on that we are not currently being told about within the story of the Primal Incarnates, but then also within Farak himself, right? So first, like I said at the beginning, the Shadow Flame does speak to Farak, but it seems like Farak is well aware that it is the Shadow Flame speaking to him. Like, he's well aware that he knows what's speaking to him and it doesn't really faze him. He just wants the power that comes with it. So he seems to be inherently far more capable of resisting the whispers of the void than any of the aspects ever could. Another interesting little side bet that I just wanted to throw out there. When Sibelian throws the spear, this is a dragon-killing spear, by the way, designed by the Jordan themselves, to kill dragons. The spear cannot penetrate Farak's hide. In fact, Farak laughs at Sibelian and goes, if that spear could penetrate my hide, the Jordan would already have killed me. So he's well aware that the Jordan can't get through him. It doesn't matter how. Remember, these are Jordan elders. These are weapons that they have designed and created specifically to try and kill dragons, because that's all the Jordan wants to do. They want to kill all of the dragons. It works perfectly fine on Abyssian. It nearly kills him, but Farak, it won't even pierce the hide, which I thought was just kind of an interesting little tidbit, maybe worth looking into a little bit more at some point. We also see that Farak has the ability to use the Shadow Flame to reawaken the Elders. Now, here's where a question comes in. I don't actually have speculation on this because we've not really seen much about the Elders yet. But do you think there's a chance that the Shadow Flame used to awaken the Elders will also corrupt the Elders? If you think that's possible, let me know, because there is a chance. You can actually see in the cinematic, as the Shadow Flame is sort of washing over them, there's a purple hue, a hint of purple that runs through these elders as they awaken. So there's a good chance that these elders are not going to be the elders that the Jordan hoped that they would be, or the ones that they used to be, but rather these are going to be elders with a bit more of a shadow inclination within them. So go look at the cinematic again if you don't believe me. You'll see there's like a small hint of purple there. The last thing I wanted to note here, or the second last thing really, that I wanted to note here is the deal between Iridikron and the Jordan, specifically the Jordan below. We know that there's a deal between Iridikron and the Jordan above, but the deal between the Jordan and Iridikron below, do we think that it is only to reawaken the elders, or that it is only to gain the flame that powers Aberys? Are we sure that that's the only reason for that deal? Because we have seen that the Jordan is willing to aid Iridikron because Iridikron promised to resurrect their elders. And the elders is why they're there. The elders is everything. That's the reason they went underground. They followed their elders underground. Iridikron wants the fire from another elder that is currently stuck inside Aberys. Would the Jordan give that up? When their whole shtick, their whole spiel is their elders, and that's why they're there, they wouldn't just hand over one of their elders. Would they? I don't think so. So it might be that Iridikron is after something completely different. It may even be that Iridikron is currently sacrificing Farak. Perhaps Iridikron never told Farak about the properties of Shadow. So Farak doesn't know that the Shadow is ultimately going to destroy his mind. But again, for Iridikron, this is not something that matters. And I've sort of laid this out before. Iridikron seems to... Okay, so Vernoth clearly cares about the Incarnates. It's her brothers and sisters. She cares about them. She wants to destroy the Aspects because the Aspects pose a threat to the Incarnates. I'm not entirely sure what that threat is, because right now, all we're seeing is one side of the story. We're hearing the side of the story from the Aspects. You know, the side that says, oh, we're under attack by these Incarnates and they really hate us. The question, however, that is still very much open-ended is, why do they hate you? Because the why, I think, is almost as important as the how in this instance. That is not present within Iridikron. I don't think Iridikron cares about his brothers and sisters at all. I think Vernoth and Farak are useful tools in Iridikron's ultimate plan. He is currently going to use Farak as a sort of diversion so that we're busy killing Farak, therefore we're not busy stopping him. After this, he's going to sacrifice Vernoth for the exact same purpose so that he can do what? What is it that Iridikron wants to do? Now, here is where everyone sort of have their own speculation theory. We know that he made terrible deals at some point with beings that his own brothers and sisters don't know about. We also know that it's not the Jordan, so anyone that's going, well, he made deals with the Jordan, it's clear as day. All his brothers and sisters know that he makes deals with the Jordan. They are all part of the deal that he made with the Jordan, so clearly that's not the deal. He made deals with other things. Things probably far more dangerous and far more powerful than what even his brothers and sisters would be willing to go for. And I can't help but continuously go back to Galakrond. I can't help it. I just continuously think, because we know that there were dragons that wanted to ally themselves with Galakrond. In the Dawn of the Aspects, it actually speaks about this. Dragons that were trying to become like Galakrond. They wanted to help Galakrond. The problem with Galakrond was he really didn't give a fuck. Like, he was the only one and he was going to be the only one. And he genuinely didn't care. To my mind, it is possible that Iridikron was allied with Galakrond right from the start. And when Galakrond fell, Iridikron swore to bring him back. And that all of it, every single thing, the fact that you have all of these Incarnates, the Primalists, all of it, has all been a massive play to bring Galakrond back. To bring Galakrond back for whatever sense, whatever reason, whatever purpose. That is what I think it is. Now, we're going to know more next week when the raid finally opens and we get to see the next bit of the story. That's when we'll probably learn the rest of this, which I'm very hopeful for, because it's done an amazing job so far of really setting up the story. We know that there's some encrypted stuff still that we have no idea what it is. So I'm very much looking forward to next week, because I do think next week might be the big one. Lastly, I will just say, how fucking cool would a full-blown movie about the Primalists and the Dragons be? Like, imagine if you could watch a movie about Tane 1 and Tane 0. How cool would that movie be? Because shit is getting real, bro. It's a good time to be a World of Warcraft player. And I think it's a very good time to be a World of Warcraft speculator. Because there's so much that we have to still figure out, and so much that we still have to talk about. I'm really, really excited for it. That's the end of the Shill Show. As always, we're going to hang out a little bit more here on YouTube, but for all of the people watching or listening over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so on, thank you so much for watching. Please follow if you haven't already, and I really appreciate you. I appreciate you for listening. I'm sorry about all the internet problems and the abrupt ends and stoppages and stuff like that. Hopefully my internet gets fixed at some point. I have no idea when, but yeah, it might just be load shedding that's causing the internet problems, and if that's the case, then there's no way to fix it, and that's sad. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you.